Hello everyone, welcome to our class. My name is Kuo Chen Lee. In today's sections, we will talk about network management. As administrators, you enable networked computers to communicate by using the basic networking protocols built into Windows Server 2008. The key protocol you will use is Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, TCP/IP. TCP/IP is actually a collection of protocols and services used under communicating over a network. It's the primary protocol used for inter-network communications. Compared to configuring other networking protocols, configuring TCP/IP communications is fairly complicated. But TCP/IP is the most versatile protocol available. Before you can configure TCP/IP networking on individual computers, you need the following information. First, IP address type, value, or both. The IP address information to assign to the computer, which can include both IPv4 and IPv6 addressing details. And second, subnet mask. The subnet mask for the IPv4 network to which the computer is attached. Third, subnet prefix length. The subnet prefix length for the IPv6 network to which the computer is attached. Fourth, default gateway address. The address of the router or routers that will function as the computer's gateway. Fifth, DNS server address. The address of the DNS server or servers that provide DNS name resolution service on the network. And network adapters are hardware devices that are used to communicate on networks. And you can install and configure network adapters by following these steps. Configure the network adapter following the manufacturer's instructions. For example, you might need to use the software provided by the manufacturer to modify the interrupt setting or the port setting of the adapter. Second, if installing an internal network interface card, shut down the computer, unplug it, and install the adapter card in the appropriate slot on the computer. When you are finished, plug the computer in and start it. Third, Windows Server 2008 should detect the new adapter during startup. If you have a separate driver disk for the adapter, insert it now. Otherwise, you might prompt to insert a driver disk. Fourth, if Windows Server 2008 doesn't detect the adapter automatically, follow installation instructions. Fifth, if networking services aren't installed on the systems, install them as described in the next sections. And if you are installing TCP/IP after installing Windows Server 2008, log on to the computer using an account with administrator privileges, and then follow these steps. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorer, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. And second, in the Network and Sharing Center, click Manager Network Connections. Third, in Network Connections, right-click the connections you want to work with and then select Properties. Fourth, this displays the local area connection properties dialog box. And fifth, in the local area connection properties dialog box, make sure that following are selected as appropriate. Internet Protocol version 6, TCP/IP v6. Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4, or both. Then click OK. Computers using IP addresses to communicate over TCP/IP Windows Server 2008 provides the following ways to configure IP addressing. First, manually. IP addresses that are assigned manually are called static IP addresses. Static IP addresses are fixed and don't change unless you change them. You will usually assign static IP addresses to Windows servers, and when you do this, you will need to configure additional information to help the server navigate the network. Second, dynamically, a DHCP server, if one is installed on the network, assigns dynamic IP addresses at startup. And the addresses might change over time. Dynamic IP addressing is the default configuration. And third, alternatively, IPv4 only. When the computer is configured to use DHCP and no DHCP server is available, Windows Server 2008 assigns an alternate private IP address automatically. By default, the alternate IPv4 address is in the range from 169.254.0.1 to 169.254.255.255 with a subnet mask of 255.255.0.0. And one local area network LAN connection is available for each network adapter installed. These connections are created automatically. To configure static IP addresses for particular connections, follow these steps. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorers, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. Second, in Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, right-click the connection you want to work with, and then select Properties. Third, double-click Internet Protocol version 6, TCP/IP v6, or Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4, as appropriate for the type of IP address you are configuring. Fourth, if your computer needs to access other TCP/IP networks, the Internet, or other subnets, you must specify a default gateway. Type the IP address of the network's default routers in the default gateway text box. And fifth, DNS is needed for domain name resolutions. So let's use the following DNS server addresses and then type a preferred address and the alternate DNS server address in the text boxes provided. When you are finished, click OK 3 times to save your changes. Repeat this process for the other network adapters and IP protocols you want to configure. Although you can use static IP addresses with workstations, most workstations will use dynamic addressing. alternative IP addressing, or both. You configure dynamic and alternative addressing by following this step. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorer, click Network and Sharing Center on the toolbar. And second, in Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, one LAN connection is shown for each network adapter installed. These connections are created automatically. If you don't see a LAN connection for installed adapter, check the driver for the adapter. Third, double-click Internet Protocol version 6, TCP/IP v6, or Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4, as appropriate for the type of the IP address you are configuring. Fourth, select Obtain an IPv6 address automatically or obtain an IP address automatically as appropriate for the type of IP address you are configuring. If desired, select Obtain DNS server address automatically, or select Use the following DNS server addresses and then type a preferred and alternate DNS server address in the text box provided. When you use a dynamic IPv4 addressing with desktop computers, you should configure an automatic alternate address. To use these configurations, on the Alternate Configuration tab, select Automatic Provide IP Address, click OK, and click Close, and then skip the remaining steps. So the best way to configure multiple gateways depends on the configurations of your network. If your organization's computers use DHCP, you will probably want to configure the additional gateways through settings on the DHCP server. If computers use static IP addresses, or you want to set gateways specifically, assign them by following these steps. First, in Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, right-click the connections you want to work with and then select Properties. And second, double-click Internet Protocol version 6, TCP/IP v6, or Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4 as appropriate for the type of the IP address you are configuring. Third, click Advanced to open the Advanced TCP/IP setting dialog box. It shows advanced setting for IPv4. The dialog box for IPv6 is similar. Fourth, to add an IP address, click Add below IP addresses to display the TCP/IP address dialog box. And after you type the IP address in the IP address field, enter the subnet mask in the subnet mask field for IPv4 addresses, or the subnet prefix length in the subnet prefix length field for IPv6 addresses. Click Add to return to the advanced TCP/IP setting dialog box. Repeat this step for each IP address you want to add. And to add the default gateway, click Add below Default Gateways to display the TCP/IP gateway address dialog box. Type the gateway address in the gateway field. By default, Windows Server 2008 automatically assigns a metric to the gateway, which determines in which order of gateways is used. To assign the metric manually, clear the automatic metric checkbox, and then enter a metric in the field provided. Click Add, and then repeat these steps for each gateway you want to add. And you can configure basic DNS setting by following these steps. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorers, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. And second, in the Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, right-click the connections you want to work with and then select Properties. Third, double-click the Internet Protocol version 6, TCP/IP v6, or Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4, as appropriate for the type of IP address you are configuring. Fourth, if the computer is using DHCP and you want DHCP to specify the DNS server address, select Obtain DNS server address automatically. Otherwise, select Use the following DNS server addresses and then type primary and alternate DNS server address in the text box provided. Fifth, click OK 3 times to save your changes. And local area connections make it possible for computers to access resources on the network and the internet. And one local area connection is created automatically for each network adapter installed on a computer. And this section examines techniques you can use to manage these connections. The General tab of this dialog box, showing figures, provides useful information regarding the following. First, IPv4 connectivity, the current IPv4 connection state and type. And you will typically see the status as local when connected to an internal network, or not connected when not connected to a network. And second, IPv6 connectivities, the current IPv6 connection state and type. You will typically see the status as local when connected to an internal network, or not connected when not connected to a network. Third, media state, the state of media, because the status dialog box is available only when the connection is enabled. You will typically see this as enabled. Fourth, durations, the amount of time the connection has been established. If the duration is fairly short, the user either recently connected to the network or the connection was recently reset. Fifth, speed, the speed of the connections. This should read 10 megabits per second for 10 megabits per second connections, 100 megabits per second for 100 megabits per second connections, and 1 gigabit per second for 1 gigabit per connections. And 6, bytes, the number of bytes sent and the number of bytes, received by the connections. As the computer sends and receives packets, you will see computer icon lights up to indicate the flow of traffic. In Windows Server 2008, you can view the current configurations for network adapters in several ways. To view configuration settings using local area connection status dialog box, follow these steps. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorers, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbars. And second, in Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, right-click the connections you want to work with and then click Status. This displays the local area connection status dialog box. If the connection is disabled or the media is unplugged, then you won't be able to access this dialog box. Enable the connections or connect the network cable to resolve the problems, and then try to display the status dialog box again. Third, click Details to view detailed information about IP address configurations. And local area connections are created and connected automatically. If you want to disable connections so that it cannot be used, follow these steps. First, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorer, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. Second, in Network and Sharing Centers, click Manage Network Connections. In Network Connections, right-click the connections and select Disable to deactivate the connection and disable it. Third, if you want to enable the connection later, right-click the connection in the network and select Enable. And Windows Server 2008 initially assigns default names for local area connections. In network connections, you can rename the connections at any time by right-clicking the connections, selecting Rename, and then typing a new connection name. If a computer has multiple local area connections, proper naming can help you and others better understand the use of a particular connection. Windows Server 2008 includes many tools for troubleshooting and testing TCP/IP connectivity. Then this section looks at automated diagnostics, basic tests that you should perform whenever you install or modify a computer's network settings. To diagnose local area connection problems, following these steps, click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorers, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. In Network and Sharing Center, click Manage Network Connections. And right-click the connections you want to work with and select Diagnose. To diagnose internet connection problems, follow these steps. Click Start and then click Network. In Network Explorers, click Network and Sharing Centers on the toolbar. Click Diagnose and Repair. And you can use the following methods to test the configurations using PIN. Try to pin IP addresses. If the computer is configured correctly and the host you are trying to reach is accessible to the network, PIN should receive a reply, as long as the pinning is allowed by the computer's firewall. If PIN cannot reach the host or is blocked by a firewall, PIN times out. And on domains that use DNS, trying to pin DNS host names. If fully qualified DNS host names are resolved correctly by PIN, DNS name resolution is configured properly. And when you are using static IP addressing, you can check the current IPv4 or IPv6 settings by entering ipconfig/or at the command prompt. The display of the ipconfig/or command includes IPv4, IPv6 addresses, default routers, and DNS servers for all interfaces. And you can also check IPv4 and IPv6 addressing separately. To check the IPv4 addressing configurations, enter netshell interface IPv4 show address. To check IPv6 addressings, enter netsh interface IPv6 show address. To use a netshell to show the configuration of remote computers, use the -r remote computer name command line options. For example, to display the configuration of the remote computer named corp server 26, you will enter the netshell -r corp server 26 interface IPv4 show address. If you are able to pin your default router, pin a remote destination by its IPv4 or IPv6 address. If you are unable to pin a remote destination by its IP address, there might be a routing problem between your node and the destination node. Enter traceroute-d IP address to trace the routing path to the remote destination. You use the -d command line options to speed up the response by preventing traceroute from performing a reverse DNS query on every near-site router interface in the routing path.